Did you catch who the emergency management director is at Minneapolis? That's Rachel Sayre, Sayre. And who is she? Well, she's a former U.S. aid official and has a background in humanitarian reliefs for the United States in Yemen, Syria, Haiti, Iraq, and drumroll, Ukraine. Every place that I just mentioned who's had a color revolution. Now she's on the ground in Minneapolis, kind of like the chief of police who was in both Las Vegas and Maui during the events that occurred there.
Strap in for another episode with Veles, right here at ESW.
Good morning, everybody. Cowboy here, and we have the amazing, awesome Dark Raven of the Deep State. Your work on Discord is amazing, and Veles, you can give us that email in a minute as far as how to get onto the Discord. Also, look in the description. We have links there. We have a goodie. We have an algorithm that I put together. It's a free trading algorithm. You get to watch me build it, and you get to see how I connect it to my computer. You got to optimize it before you use it. It's not plug and play, but it's pretty cool. This last week or two, it's like 2 years have happened. I don't know how you keep up with all of it and do everything that you do outside of that. I'm severely impressed.
I don't either. I shouldn't think about it. I'm going to start dropping stuff.
But please, where do you want to take it, Veles?
All righty. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. A recorded program for us today. We will periodically have some live ones as we used to do. Just have to adjust to everybody's schedules. So for those of you still digging out of the snow or may yet be this weekend up in the Northeast, hang in there. I also tested the structural and engineering limits of my own snowblower this last week. So as Algo mentioned, and as I often open these programs, if you need to reach me, have a comment about the program, you want access to Discord or what have you, the email address to reach me is 1917VELES@gmail.com. Again, 1917Veles@gmail.com. And please also continue to check out Gus Demos at perpetualassets.com for what Gus does, and check out algofactory.tech as well. So the anti-neocon poster. Ryan Dawson over at his website has a new poster available. Some of you may be familiar with the plethora of Ryan's wall posters, who include one showing key figures in the Epstein story, the anthrax scare around 9/11, the Biden family, and others. Recently, he's made available a poster providing key figures and organizations involved in the events of 9/11. I recently bought one, and it's certainly worth adding to your collection. You can find all of his offerings, which include mugs and things, over at his website, ancreport.com. Crazy days and nights. The famous website is now a presence on YouTube, as I've mentioned previously. And if you haven't already done so, please take a moment and review the content that's there, because they have both the text postings on the website as well as what's on YouTube. I have to say, a number of the recent little vignettes they've done on famous people and events are the sorts of things that would have resulted in your disappearing back in the 1980s or even the 1990s. They did a single program on Don Henley of the Eagles who left me feeling very uncomfortable. I'll warn you, there's content on the YouTube site even more disturbing than is what is posted to their famous and ongoing website. But if you're seeking truth, it's an excellent place to look. But I'm not joking when I say some of that stuff you'll want to kind of prepare yourself, because a lot of I would say our heroes, I guess, have fallen from great heights. And this includes favorite performers, public figures, Hollywood personalities, and things we've all forgotten about that are darker than your worst nightmares. Finders keepers. I mentioned on a prior program there's no new news on that topic until early February. However, something did pop up. I've noticed recently on X a number of, for lack of a better way of saying it, a number of posters I haven't seen before who are all different, but they're all posting the same criticisms of the Finder Keepers group for having notified the FBI that they thought they found the missing Union gold from the Civil War up in Pennsylvania. And it seems very, as I often say these things, it seems very well put together, very well orchestrated, and all the comments are very neuro-linguistic about what a bunch of stupid idiots. Why would you ever trust the government? Blah, 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 blah. And I thought, I wonder if there's something about to come out in this case and the FBI is trying to do damage control, or someone acting on their behalf is doing damage control. Because the simple fact of the matter is, not to go down a rabbit hole, the gold that was lost during the American Civil War is still on the territory of the United States. It's still in the territorial boundaries of the United States, and it's still the property of the United States. So if you found quote unquote Union gold and dug it up, not to be indelicate, unless you're Goldfinger from James Bond, you're not exactly in a position to melt the stuff down and not explain to anybody where it all came from. And if you try and turn it in, because it's going to be in coinage and similar, a lot of questions are going to be asked about what's the bona fides of this material. So what's the backstory with the treasure hunters, finders, keepers? Well, it's exactly that. They wanted to be, under U.S. law, they would be paid a finder's fee for having found the missing gold, and it would be significant. The other thing we've covered here on Rogue is that the state of Pennsylvania is owed a lot of money. Now, this Union gold, depending on who you're talking to and what records they're using, is at least $1 billion or more, possibly 800 million. But we're talking about a lot of money here. And so Pennsylvania wants to be paid, if indeed it was there. And this treasure group wants to be paid. And that's the crux of the matter. There's nothing wrong with them having notified the government that they may have found missing government property. The issue is the behavior of the FBI. But all these people who all independently of one another are posting the exact same content, but yet the messages posted on each of those postings are all very well worded and everything else. But each and every one of these posted messages about mentioning this group are all negative as heck. It's like, wait a minute, this smells like psychological manipulation. Marco Polo. You may recall the Marco Polo website where several items were posted, including content from Hunter Biden's laptop. That website and people running it were very helpful in providing several documents in the public domain. It's worth noting that the Biden family has been suing that website owner for some time. The website owners have succeeded in having 2 of 5 complaints against them dropped on the First Amendment and similar grounds. If you'd like to throw those folks a few bucks to help them with their legal bills, the link for that, one moment, is one word, Marco Polo 501c3.substack.com. You can also just go to the Marco Polo website, which is Marco Polo. But anyway, those guys did a lot of public good by putting that stuff out there. The power grid. The winter weather we witnessed the week of January 26th left me with several considerations worth sharing. I've said for years, news organizations love bad weather. It's apolitical or economic in nature, where people's views will block a desire to watch certain coverage because they refuse to listen to another view. Your ideology is irrelevant to bad weather. It universally affects everyone, regardless of race, class, geography, and a host of other considerations. Lastly, you can pull in traditional viewers as everyone needs that information. Then, of course, they can scare the hell out of people and make their advertisers happy. All those extra viewers watching your ads. To quote Ben Fong Torres of Rolling Stone, not to say the weather wasn't serious, but we've had bad weather nationally. I knew you'd get that. But we've had bad weather nationally in recent years. They treated this one with a bit more insane news coverage, and I think it was intentional. What seemed to be accompanying this coverage was its potential impact on the grid, fuel prices being high in areas struck by these storms and similar. Ergo, was this a target of opportunity to focus on, quote, this is why we need a renewal of the U.S. power grid and maybe nuclear, specifically the continued breathtaking speed of nuclear rollout across key U.S. states and the 4 primary technologies being leveraged as part of that. Did we have several power outages caused by the storm? Yes, and often in southern states more than northern because ice was pulling down power lines. Nashville was one of those cities where on Sunday about half the city was without power. Some good may come of this beyond continued rollout of nuclear power capabilities. We might get some hardening and redundancy in parts of the U.S. power grid following this storm. Thanks to our experiences during the COOF, I'm sure people had enough toilet paper at least. Oh, and while much of the U.S. found itself in a freezer, just by way of comparison, south of the equator in Australia, they've been managing some extreme heat. That sure sounds like something the sun may be doing, but what do I know? Status check. Speaking of that conflict in the general state of things, here's a soundbite. You're living in a world where U.S. Special Forces and military assets were dispatched deep into South America to arrest the president of another country, supposedly for narcotics and machine guns. Yet not a single person connected to Dr. Fauci, January 6th, U.S. aid fraud, and the list goes on, has been arrested. Not even a scapegoat's been arrested. Then the big one. Not a single person connected to Jeff Epstein's been prosecuted either. That's not a crack on the current administration. That's a statement about the current state of things. The United States sent Ukraine $100 billion for what again? Yet we're going to leverage our military spear to arrest Maduro, who we've not heard from for weeks. Hey, V.
Hey, buddy.
Personal resource considerations. And I'm also bringing this up, folks, because a number of people have reached out to me by email and DMs on Discord. We've raised the following on prior programs and wanted to do a refresh. This goes into the category of things you can do in your personal life. Regarding your physical identification in public, here are some ideas. In major cities or areas with a lot of surveillance, you'll want to wear polarized sunglasses, not just dark lenses. The newer ID systems and the cameras can identify you through tinted lenses, so you need polarized ones. Second, find comfortable ball caps with a nondescript image or logo. And by that, I mean avoid Nike or sports teams or similar. Equally, wear different ball caps if possible, along with the polarized lenses. Third, if you're walking city streets in said major cities, or especially hotel lobbies with security cameras, turn your cell phone to airplane mode long before you walk through there. Try and keep the phone set to airplane mode or in a Faraday bag as long as you can, unless, of course, you're waiting for an important call. This is to avoid facial recognition associating with you and your cell phone. Nothing is foolproof, and these have the ability to help you at a minimum cut down on directed advertisements to you and your family members. Fourth, if you've not already purchased RFID card sleeves for your driver's license and your credit cards, please buy some. I use them myself, and they're very effective, especially in large cities and similar places where people have sniffers looking for your credit card information as they walk by or pass near you. Fifth, if you stay in a hotel, take the room card with you and throw it away at another physical location. Do not leave it in the room. Throw it in the trash can of the room or of the hotel. There are networks of people trying to find those cards, and I know of cities in the U.S. where organized crime pays housekeepers and others to bring them those. Why is that? Because even if you're staying in a modest Hilton or Marriott property, they tend to do the same thing, which is they store the guest's information on the card, including at times your credit card information. Some hotels will let you use the room key to charge purchases. Even if a particular hotel stays with a property who's not storing your personal demographics on the room key, it's just a good habit to get into. Sixth, when it comes to the states where you may retire, keep in mind the best U.S. states to retire in do shift. However, that doesn't mean you need to always move to the state who's number one. Case in point, Florida is the best state to retire in recently shifted into the number 2 spot and was replaced by none other than Wyoming. This tracks with what I've mentioned on our programs about high net worth folks who've moved to states like Wyoming, and they wouldn't be doing that without a reason. Then again, if you'll recall from other programs, Michigan is in the 21st spot as best places to retire, but northern Michigan is another high net worth enclave, and they wouldn't be there unless there was a reason to be. South Dakota has moved into the number 3 spot. Again, it doesn't mean you can't retire in Mississippi. Just know your options and your financial situation and medical needs. Nor are we dispensing financial advice, just pointing out the facts and trends. I've shared previously, even if you want to move to Florida, their infrastructure is straining with all the folks who are moving there. Plus, if there's severe weather, your ability to flee that state is harder now than ever before. Sure, folks in Miami can sail away on their boats to a safer place, but that's not really an option for you. Not alone. There's always a lot of good stories to be found in the Daily Mail News website. Obviously, we can barely trust anything in the mainstream news, and Daily Mail, I find, is one who tends to provide an in-depth review of things weeks or months after the alternative community raised a topic. This last weekend, one popped up who did catch my attention as it strikes the types of things we cover here on Rogue. Think Son of Sam, the Zodiac Killer, Charles Manson's foray, certain mass shootings, Oklahoma in '95, and the list goes on. What I'm talking about is researchers and others who've pointed out official police reports on the killings in Utah have a number of inconsistencies, namely were others involved. The Daily Mail posted an article from a longtime investigator asking similar questions about Brian Kohberger, namely that many people being killed, no one able to fight back effectively, even if they were just woken up, and photos from the crime scenes who seem out of place for a single assailant. I'm not saying we're dealing with MK Ultra, but at the same time, that question has to be asked. Canada. Tom Luongo said something interesting on Sunday. He said, even given U.S. interests at this time, Canada should know the U.S. is not going to do to them what the Allies did to Czechoslovakia and others at the end of World War II. Namely, let Churchill in his bathtub tell Stalin to keep the peace as the Soviet Union wanted in order to avoid war after the war was over. Many patriotic people in those countries were planning on how to rebuild when the war was over. Soviet intelligence killed them all, and in brutal ways as a warning to others who thought their new boss was going to be someone they elected. Tom's point being, whichever provinces in Canada leave or adjust their relationship with Toronto, that the United States is not going to sell them out later. In my view, not because the people directing U.S. policy right now are nice, but because it's in our interest to see to it that they manage their own lives without the kind of interference they've had to manage the last 100 years. Matthew Arrett, by the way, who is Canadian, has done one of the most superb jobs I've seen explaining Canadian history. A history who's not what you think it is, and trust me, I've taken courses on Canadian political systems and foreign policy at the graduate school level. We rarely delved into much of Matthew's work, where he astutely pointed out all of the Canadian leaders who attempted to pull Canada into self-determination and were stopped by our friends in London. A few of them may have died in the process, depending on who you ask. Tom also went there. He agreed with the consensus in certain circles that there was indeed an attempted coup against the Chinese government by military officers last weekend. Officially, several high-ranking officers were arrested without explanation. We've seen this movie before, folks, in the Middle East and South America, where military officers were paid to take over a government. Tom's take was this was a direct reaction following statements made at Davos by the U.S. and others, as well as the continued moves to cut off Apex elite funding sources. At least in China, they usually kill you with a single bullet and send the bill to your family. If this was North Korea, you don't want to know what might happen to those officers. And Crazy Days and Nights isn't even going to go there. Celestial alignment. A celestial alignment will occur on February 28th, where Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, Venus, Mercury, and Neptune will be visible in the night sky and align at the same time. This is important not just because it's occurring, but because of the beliefs of our friends in the Apex elite world. Equally, always remember Jupiter is involved, is also very important in those belief systems as part of this alignment. This was preceded by the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Pluto, and Mars, all aligned in Aquarius this week. Also, the 2nd of February, which is this Monday, is the 33rd date of 2026, and we know the significance of 33. Charlie Kirk, and this will delve into Algo's comment at the opening about the research I do. It's funny, even when something occurs in the open in front of us, they wait and are patient for us to let it go into the memory hole. My Alabama tick I won't let go of, Charlie Kirk's autopsy and burial. Yes, Utah is conveniently one of those states where autopsies are not treated as public records. This is why, among other things, I requested Maricopa County in Arizona provide me with a hard copy of the marriage contract between Charlie and Erica Kirk. After much delay due to my normal responsibilities, I've begun the process of requesting records from the state of Utah. I submitted 2 requests to Utah so that none of you in our audience need to bother with these requests, which, by the way, in the state of Utah, they call these a GRAMA request or GRAMA request. The first was to the Utah law enforcement regarding the investigation into his death. The second was to the coroner's office with a request to confirm an autopsy was conducted, who was the physician, and when did it occur. I was very clear to the coroner's office, I'm not asking for anything about autopsy results, physician's notes, or anything else, because I'm aware of Utah law without family approval to release certain things. I simply asked them to confirm, was the autopsy conducted, the name of the physician, and the date. Regarding my law enforcement request, they indicated as the prosecutor is still bringing a case against the suspect and it's an active criminal matter, Under Utah Code Section 63G-2-305, they cannot release it to me. Then they suggested I contacted the Utah State Bureau of Investigation as they're officially in charge. I appreciate the fact they responded and indicated to go ahead and reach out to the State Bureau of Investigation. Regarding the coroner's response, and frankly, that's the one I really want, there's no response yet, and they have 10 days from my request to respond. On a related note, you can see a lot of crafty living in the matrix spin around Erica Kirk right now. What do I mean? You have articles by high-profile reporters on Daily Mail and others pointing out she may not be a very nice person, what's up with the leather pants, her tears appear fake, etc. Of course, that's what they're going to feed us, is the topics they need you to avoid or worse. Why is she so closely connected to the goings-on at Fort Huachuca in Arizona, who's 15 miles from the U.S. border with Mexico? Her family connections raise a lot of questions, as well as her connections to one of the witnesses at her wedding ceremony, because I have a copy of the document, who now has a major leading position at Turning Point USA. So therefore, we will distract you with the classic things we tell the American people. You increase the sugar in favorite foods. You give people a sex scandal, or you paint someone as not nice as their public image. That way you don't pay attention to the darkness following her around, a darkness who, frankly, may make her someone to be pitied given how controlled she is. Military science. One of the tactics used in military science are various forms of attack who are meant to probe or draw out the enemy. They're not a full-on attack, but the more the enemy believes that, the better it's better for the attacking party. What are the facts right now when it comes to protest activity? The groups funding and directing those efforts are running low on funds and or disruptions to their funds. This makes identifying their remaining sources of funding and how they're directed more important than previously. What has occurred in the last few months? Several high-profile areas, including Los Angeles and Minneapolis, have faced intense ICE activity who drew out corresponding responses by activist networks. ICE operations tend to operate for a period and then pull back for various reasons, including Minneapolis this week. The reason may be because those in opposition to the groups funding the protesters have now identified more completely their resources. As a comparative example, when the Union Army attacked Atlanta during the Civil War, they had 3 full armies. The Confederacy only had 1. The Union would attack on the right, then the left, then the center, constantly drawing out the single Confederate army to exhaust them. All sides knew the outcome, as eventually the Confederates would have to abandon the city. Main course items. Current state of things. We're doing it again, my friends. We're falling into the traps set for us by others to keep us distracted. It goes beyond where I'm starting this segment. I hear people discussing government overreach from the alternative community from recent ICE actions. Counter arguments of these are federal agents operating under federal orders and the people confronting them are seeking conflict. Did protesters' firearms or vehicles represent a true threat or not? And similar. First, even on the left coast, if you show up with a gun and confront LAPD about their policies, or federal agents to confront LAPD, see what happens to you when you encounter LAPD or federal agents. So let me turn on God's box fan and clear the air a bit. Repeat this after me. This is a war. This is a war. However, it's not we the people versus foreign nationals in the U.S. without legal reason to be here. It's not the righteous government of the orange man protecting the people from foreigners who come from low-trust societies. To paraphrase some statements by folks in the alternative community, this is what it feels like, folks, when a color revolution occurs in your own country. You just cannot let yourself internalize that, though. It's not about Trump. It's not about parties. Let me revisit some content we covered previously and will again later. If the U.S. wanted to address foreign labor, it would have been able to do it many times prior to this. I have direct experience, and I've shared this with all of you before, on this topic, on the ground. I know you're tired of me reminding you all, but I'm going to go there again. From 2005 to 2008, I was a consultant working with DHS, among others, about a well-regulated guest worker program in the United States. I had to have a security clearance to work on the darn thing. You need to apply for citizenship, and you can still be in the country without harassment under that program. We give you an ID card with your photo, your demographics, and a CAC chip on it. Go wherever you want, work wherever you want. Anyone who messes with you or causes you harm under this program, you would call DHS and that agency would go deal with them. No one was going to make you slave labor. And as I've said many, many times, that's why this program, who was sponsored by both members of the Democrat and Republican parties, was never going to see the light of day. To quote the author and analyst George Friedman, because the people who want cheap, exploitable labor are better organized and have more money than people who believe in the rule of law. It was not Gavin Newsom. It was not Mayor Mamdani in Manhattan. It was the governor of none other than Wisconsin, Tony Evers, who said in the last 2 weeks, his state cannot survive without undocumented labor. He said that from a podium. He can't survive without undocumented labor in Wisconsin. That's not That's not Mayor Bass of Los Angeles, an admitted Marxist who also lives very well. That's a governor of a cheese state.
No offense to anybody from Wisconsin who's listening,
which includes my relatives.
Yeah, I mean, I like their cheese. No offense.
It was Bill Clinton in the mid-1990s who spoke of the rule of law often when it comes to citizenship process and labor coming into U.S. borders. We have more than 25 years of my life on this earth where we could have smoothed this issue out and we did nothing. Equally, if we wanted to hit the larger offenders out there, then why has no one shown up at Tyson's Foods or some others who could take a massive bite out of undocumented labor in the U.S.? Like I keep saying, though, that's not the goal. That's not what this is about. Did we want to stop significant amounts of narcotics coming into the U.S. with recent actions in Venezuela? No. We just wanted to cut down on the amount of narcotics funding the London Corporation. Most of USA narcotics come in through our West Coast in Colombia and Bolivia, not Venezuela, whose any drugs coming out of Venezuela go to the East Coast. Our current efforts to resolve the tens of millions of undocumented workers in the U.S., no, these efforts are to impact illicit financial movement of resources to London. This is the Vorlons in the shadows from Babylon 5 fighting it out. It's not even remotely close to what the media, and I mean any of the media, are talking about. Step back for a moment, my friends, and consider the adage armchair warriors versus people who understand logistics. You don't win wars with just tactics, you win them with logistics. What are the logistics in frictions we see in key cities in the U.S.? The leadership and the coordination of these activities are well funded. To go with a very intuitive comment, who the heck has an employer who lets you not show up to work because I got to go protest today? I mean, other than universities. No one. Then how do you pay your bills? Because you're paid to do this and you're trained to do this. Does anyone think ISIS being funded by the British, the Kurds being funded by whomever was using them yet again, or any major narcotics or militant organization being funded is ever organic? No, they're carefully nurtured, developed, and used for as long as possible. And if they're no longer useful, like the SA of Nazi Germany or the Viet Cong or many others, they're wiped out so there's no witnesses. Did you catch who the emergency management director is in Minneapolis? That's Rachel Sayre, Sayre. And who is she? Well, she's a former U.S. aid official and has a background in humanitarian reliefs for the United States in Yemen, Syria, Haiti, Iraq, and drumroll, Ukraine. Every place that I just mentioned who's had a color revolution. Now she's on the ground in Minneapolis, kind of like the chief of police who was in both Las Vegas and Maui during the events that occurred there. The only thing that matters is the media narrative. Both narratives. The narrative always has two sides, and neither is the truth. Again, to quote from Babylon 5, your truth, their truth, and what lies within the middle. The warring parties were telegraphing, loosely said, civil war in the U.S. for some time. Why? Because it was a warning to stop cutting off their funding. And what happened? Efforts to cut off their funding increased, whether Venezuela, USAID, or various organized frauds against the U.S. Why did U.S. intelligence get involved in narcotics trafficking? Among other reasons, it provides off-the-books funding for intelligence operations where Congress, even if they wanted to, has no idea what those agencies are doing. So why is parasitic theft of money out of U.S. aid or daycares in Minnesota any different? Stop fighting the battles they tell us to fight and focus on what's really happening and what you need to do to protect yourself and those you love. One further soundbite. Now there are voices saying other large organized frauds across the U.S. need to be investigated, including Russian organized crime. If that happens, buckle up. Hidden archaeology. It's been a while since I covered this topic, and it's been too long. Let me provide some groundwork, and we'll get into a few main points. First, there are too frequently those who attack one researcher or author in the alternative archaeology or history community and attempt to discredit the entire field because of that one person's work. A frequent target for this is Graham Hancock, and I know those among you who don't like him. I would like to point out a comment from one of my professors in college. To paraphrase what they said, yes, there are researchers in any field whose work is later shown to be partially or mostly at fault. In academia, what matters is you leveraged the existing body of scholarly work and attempted to benefit it through your own efforts. It's about the body of scholarly work, because even work who may be partially discredited later will often still contain elements of value and research that can be leveraged by other researchers at another time. Frankly, there are not as many researchers as we might believe in any field, and as a result, everyone's work is important on one level or another. As a result, please keep in mind the phrase, the body of scholarly work. I would not necessarily term what we do at Rogue as scholarly work, yet I was surprised to realize, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, that in my 5 years here, I've written over 1,000 pages of content for these programs. Our work here has certainly evolved and progressed individually and collectively. Returning to the alternative community in my opening point, recent researchers are the ones who are taking fire. Graham Hancock, it's not just recent researchers who are taking fire. Graham Hancock and Robert Schoch come to mind, along with Freddie Silva occasionally, and if more people knew about Mark Carlotto, perhaps him as well. However, it goes back to Eric von Daniken, or the recent late Eric von Daniken, in the 1970s, along with Zecharia Sitchin. What if I were to tell you, though, the narratives of alternative history and Earth cycles go back even further than Daniken and Sitchin? In the 1950s, we had Charles Hapgood and his theories about the Earth's plates being far more active than traditional academics believe. What about the early 1900s and Augustus Le Plongeon, who was inspired by Charles Etienne Brassier de Bourbourg, who did his work in the 1800s? Who else was delving into theories like these in the 1800s? One notable is the German explorer Alexander von Humboldt. Yet even further back than those researchers is one of the chroniclers of Hernando Cortez named Francisco López de Gomara from the mid-1600s. My point being, many researchers over a span of nearly 400 years have contributed to the body of scholarly knowledge in alternative history and Earth catastrophes. The one thing they all have in common is their work and hypotheses are ignored or downright repressed. Begging the question, is this simply academic protectionism by those who have a current book right, or is there more going on? When it comes to the early 1980s, researchers who put forward papers on a PBS science program argued that the dinosaurs were wiped out by a planetary impact. That was most certainly academic protectionism. I remember very well the massive pushback those researchers received. Even high school science teachers were mad because they loosely said, now I've got to go change all my lesson plans, unquote. God forbid. Now those theories are accepted as essentially fact. When dealing with alternative historical theories and Earth's catastrophes, I detect far more going on in the realm of repression and criticism than what occurred with the dinosaurs from the example back in the 1980s. This topic will continue to be covered on my future programs. The long game, Caribbean, and local neighborhood. There were many assumed reasons for the moves in Venezuela, especially given the country's president was removed, the government left intact, and the U.S. left town like it was a tactical raid of a leader we didn't like. Don't get me caught up in the various distracting stories about how effective U.S. special forces were, the coordination of Space Force in military operations to take out the power grid and a host of things. It was always about the long game, my friends, and it's often hard to see the goals in these conflicts until later, but there are clues. I believe many of us in the alternative community are getting much better at reading the stars, the occult symbolisms, the goals, as we know. The final end state among many is a finalized new economic system. To that end, let's look at Venezuela and ask some logical questions. Does Venezuela possess considerable oil deposits, both known and potential? Yes. Is that oil valuable? Well, on a certain level, no. It's too high in sulfur and only the United States can economically refine it. Yes, China has the means, but it's not economically effective to ship to China for refining. Even when Venezuela and the U.S. were on friendlier terms, We refined more of their oil than at present, but we're forgetting an important dynamic. In those years, various fuels, whether jet, gasoline, diesel, or naval fuel, could possess a higher sulfur content than legally allowed today, further putting pressure on avoiding Venezuelan oil. What about Venezuela's geographic position in South America? Is that valuable? Well, not really, and the capital's divided from the country's resources by mountain ranges. So why remove Maduro, who was an ineffective leader anyway? Here are some suggestions. First, it put other powers using these countries for their own use on notice. You're not doing that in the U.S. neighborhood anymore. Please note the recent political dust-up in Peru as that country's president is embroiled in a bit of a scandal now with China. When I say China, I don't mean the country exactly, but key Chinese leaders and business people who want Peru's resources. Remember, you can make money in China, but don't ever embarrass the public face of the country or the party, or they'll put a bullet into your economic crimes. That's always the danger of being very wealthy in China. So whomever is caught up in what's taking place in Peru may want to consider defection. To me, it's not isolated. Everyone knows what everyone's assets are doing out there. I see the disclosures of what's taking place in Peru connected to Venezuela as one of many threads. To be clear, though, this is not about chatter saying China is creating some kind of beachhead in the Americas. China is a major power and a self-interested actor, like everybody else. As much of the U.S. relies on China for certain key resources, not all of whom originate in China, by the way, Chinese interests are located elsewhere, and China needs to leverage what resources they can outside their country. The events of the last few months are clarifying to what degree they're allowed to do that in the U.S. zone of influence. The second item about Venezuela and why. It massively disrupted networks from which the Lenin Corporation and its allies were able to move money through Venezuelan banks. This is choked off, but of course not stopped. Funds that NGOs and others can use to cause social disruptions in the U.S. Adding in U.S. aid and other institutions whose theft of money from the U.S. has been disrupted is a more assertive U.S. putting a lot of pain on the Lenin Corporation's money. Remember the adage from the Chinese tactician Sun Tzu, for every enemy arrow you acquire and add to your quiver, it is as though you've added 5 because you're taking the enemy's assets and using them for your own. This is what happens when public aid money in the U.S. is redirected to harm the U.S. Such activity continues to be systematically disrupted. It doesn't mean London cannot attack the U.S. through social disruption, but their available funding sources are greatly disrupted. Further, it also means they would need to use their own money to launch such efforts, begging the question how serious they are really about their goals when it's their own money they're spending, not stolen U.S. funds. Third and important, Venezuela was a means to achieve larger long-term goals. You speak to anyone in the world of shipping, world history, and geographic assets, and they will tell you the most important piece of real estate in the Caribbean is Cuba. Cuba is like the ultimate fort overlooking your harbors to protect you from pirates or sea vessels still at sea coming into dock. Except Cuba functions the way for every bit of trade in the Northern Hemisphere. Recall what may have been saying about that part of the New World economy is going to be focused on trade at a different level than what we knew previously. It helps in part, keyword, in part, explain everything from Gaza to Greece to Turkey and related in that hemisphere right now. Access to ports and access to rights of way of shipping is going to become even more important than previously. So what's Cuba's thumbscrew, and has been since Fidel and the boys rolled in 58? They need cheap energy to keep that island running. You may have noticed the last few years, Cuba keeps having more and more power outages than they're familiar with. The U.S. embargo is often cited, but that doesn't mean they can't get equipment or spare parts they need from everyone from Mexico to Italy to Spain. So what's the deal? This brings us to that adage about armchair warriors talk about tactics, but people who get it talk about logistics. In many industries where I've worked, that comes down to supply chains, maintenance schedules, how much downtime for regular maintenance, what is your degree of skilled personnel to keep things running, and the list goes on. Cuba could and does get spare parts if they're needed, because previously Venezuela's banks, among others, could help them buy what they needed. Here's the rub. It's that Cuba's energy infrastructure needs more spare parts and more maintenance than traditionally because things are wearing out more quickly. Why are they wearing out more quickly? Cuba's been leveraging their one last supplier of fuel oil from Venezuela without the ability to mix it with lighter grades. Heavy oil, though, does provide more lubrication in systems, but it does still tend to cause higher wear in other areas of machinery. Cuba is now running almost entirely on Venezuela oil, who's some of the thickest stuff out there. It's more like sludge at times than a smooth flowing oil. The analogy I've used is 200 years ago, poor people burning peat instead of wood or coal for their fires. It'll burn, but it stinks, and you don't get much of a flame, and it smokes terribly. The lower grade oil is contributing to and causing higher than normal wear in Cuba's power grid. What are we not talking about in the news unless you really dig? The U.S. has left a bunch of corrupt people in charge of Venezuela if they look the other way, allow Maduro to be removed, and do what the U.S. wants, including some help to their oil industry, but we'll see if that happens. However, it does mean Cuba's fuel supplies are being disrupted even more. If Cuba doesn't collapse of its own accord, they need to cut a deal quickly. Russia and China are not going to provide them fuel. Russia has its own issues right now, and China has other strategic interests. The chess piece, who is Cuba, may finally at long last fall. Before or following that, we'll see what comes of 1 to 2 Canadian provinces leaving Canada as a further breakdown of the London Corporation hovering over the U.S. from above. Also, unlike Venezuela, Cuba has a powerful, wealthy, and finely tuned expatriate community who have literally planned how they're going to rebuild the country. I'm not joking. The folks on Calle Ocho in Miami have that planned down to the square meter. Meaning, unlike Venezuela trying to rebuild itself, Cuba has a large community of people who speak the language and know the culture and want to rebuild their homeland. Yes, Cuba's current leaders probably need to move to the south of France or other international destinations, as few, if any of them, will want to be part of the new country. As far as the people of Cuba are concerned, regardless of ideology, if the power stays on and they have food and they have opportunity, they'll be practical and adjust. The only unanswered major question is, should these events unfold and Cuba and a chunk of Canada are under new management, does it stop there? Speaking of those waterways and trade access, we're now getting into the reality of Greenland. The U.S. didn't want all of Greenland. They just wanted access points within the country for monitoring ship traffic and military monitoring. But Veles, Denmark is a NATO country. They own Greenland, so why go in this direction? Because the U.S. is leaving NATO. It no longer serves our strategic interest. We just need to be able to leverage that real estate in Greenland in order to monitor the waterways. I yield the floor, gentlemen.
Excellent, man, as always.
Great job.
V, do you have anything?
No, I don't. I apologize, folks. I have workers coming in and out of my house taking care of some things. So I'll be spotty all day today. I apologize, guys.
Yeah, V, you sent me that picture. I've never seen a gorilla on a ladder before. That was really
No, that wasn't me, bro. That was the workers, man.
You got gorilla workers?
Yes. Oh. I only hire my own kind. I thought you knew that.
When I say you're a racist, I mean like not
I'm
even
a speciesist.
Human. You're a speciesist.
Yeah.
I have some items, and first of all, Veles, I know what you have going on outside of Rogue, which is, we all have our day jobs, right? And for you to come on here and do this, man, we always appreciate it right now. And of course, audience, for those of you who might be new, Veles is Rogue. Like, we have guests, but Veles really is Rogue. So there is a difference there. And the difference that, as much as I am or anybody else, for sure. Now, I wish I had that kind of presentation that you do, though. It's so nice to listen to the way you do your shows, and I will continue to glaze you. I will do this. Oh, no, really. As far as the content itself,
the check is in the mail.
The check's in the mail. You'll send me the $1,000. She sent me the $7,000 check. With the trafficking for maybe certain intelligence agencies, who will go unnamed, CIA. Who might be doing some kind of trafficking or whatever to fund their books and stuff. Ian Burlingame made a really interesting comment on a show. I can't remember if it was like me on the show or it was another show, but he was saying that, no, it was a different show. He was saying that they make probably 10 times as much money with stock manipulation as they do with those kind of other, fraudulent activities. And obviously that's probably really hard to measure, and who knows what was that again?
That the intelligence agencies, through manipulating stock, and I think the bellwether that illuminated all of us on that reality was what occurred around the time of 9/11, when we still had, NBC and others still asking actual questions, saying, "Hey, what's this company or this investment firm set up by the CIA to take advantage of disruptions in the global environment to profit from stock trades. And the agency was like, nothing to see here. That was just something and we shut it off. The analogy I used to hear in Washington was one of the reasons why the intelligence community likes keeping organized crime around is every time organized crime finds a way they can profit from something illegal, the intelligence agencies immediately run in and follow behind them and do the same thing.
Well, you know what? It is what it is. And this actually speaks to a comment you made in the show that might have gone over a lot of people's heads, but I think in my opinion, it's the core way that I look at such issues, is that trying to fight these battles where we really don't have the ability to like change the bigger picture. Like, do you think really us on this show, we're going to go stop what's going on? Like, whether it's, Somali, stuff, or whether it's something to do with like commercial driver's licenses and Indians, or whether it's like the little country in the Levant.
I think at a local, in fairness to your very excellent question, yes, we need to avoid charging windmills. But I've shared with all of our audience about, I have knowledge of, because I had family members who were impacted by it, of foreign national labor who, quite frankly, were being piled into homes and large, like a single family home, where 30 of them are all moved in there as cheap labor for certain manufacturing companies and stuff out in the Midwest. And
I remember hearing about that, actually.
Yeah, local law enforcement didn't want to get involved. State bureaus of investigation didn't want to get involved. The FBI was like, leave us alone. And people who were on the other side of the spectrum, if you will, and said, look, mea culpa, what can your side do to help? And it's like, well, for starters, have you done the following? Yes, did all those things. And they all told you to go pound sand. Yes. Call the water department. What? Call the water department. And they did. And others like them followed suit. And, because the water, it's our legal friend of the show, Postal Inspector General and the Water Department. If there's any way you can involve those two government, because those agencies love to remind people they still have power. And they don't care what other federal agencies say. It's like we're slapping them. But the Water Department, most U.S. Cities, has immense power to bring huge fines. And in most cases, the people that are, I wouldn't even say squatting, but are doing this will flee immediately, like cockroaches. And of course, people have said, well, now what am I going to do? I got an abandoned property living next to me. And it's like, buy it at the bankruptcy sale, flip it, and make some money off your misfortune. And it's like, well, it's like, yeah, I know. But it's like, look, this is what you can do. But yeah, are you going to take on vast fraudulent networks across this country? Not only should you stay the heck out of that, even authors who've tried to investigate that stuff have been threatened or worse over those topics. But yeah, there's, and that's why I made the comment I did about a Russian organized crime. It's like you think angry native Somalis upset over their earnings being disrupted. Man, you want to take on Russian organized crime? Even Vladimir Putin thinks that one through carefully before he does it. I personally know people in federal law enforcement circles that are like, we do not want to take those guys on unless we absolutely have to, because it's just, they're everywhere and they've got people everywhere. And it's like, if we hit them in one area, they're going to hit us in 10 other areas. So my suggestion to the government would be cut a deal. It's like a lot of things in life, folks. Yeah, you can. Quite frankly, this has gone on in the United States since the founding of the country. Is there a criminal network operating in Boston? Yes. Are we going to shut them down? No. What are we going to do? We'll allow them to continue their criminal network up to a point. You guys can make this much money, but no more. Because then it looks bad, and then we got to start arresting people, and you're going to push back. And, to quote Jack Nicholson from Batman 1989, nobody wants a war, so we'll just go our separate ways. Cut a deal, because they're still you're never going to uproot Russian organized crime out of the United States. There's no way, but you can cut a deal.
I would venture to guess that that's a small version of a much bigger problem too. So, that's not their territory.
Well, and they have no love for London either. So the other question that has to be asked in all seriousness is the redirection in the media to say, oh, we need to take on Russian organized crime. Is that because if the federal government were to do that, it would be disastrous? So is that really a misdirection? And there's other criminal networks that they're more concerned might get disrupted. Say, for instance, narcotics traffickers out of Mexico or similar, because that's another biggie. But yeah, it's who is most guilty for fraud in the United States and giving large portions of that money to London, or for that matter, the Swiss. That's the question that has to be asked. Yes, we've got fraud in the United States. Yes, we've got criminal networks in the United States. And quite frankly, I'm sure going back to the Sumerians, they had their own problems, 10,000 years ago. The question is, how really damaging are some of these criminal networks other than just they're there versus they are directly funding the equivalent of color revolutions on the U.S., because that's what we got to deal with.
Yeah. I think that fighting the battles we can fight. I think the local level is this actually kind of, it's so funny. I've vacillated back and forth between being a complete libertarian and, who cares about the broader picture? And then it's like, okay, well, the broader picture matters. And a lot of us in this audience were like, yeah, don't vote ever again, worry about raising food and prepping. And then you kind of, I don't know, I drift. And I'm willing to admit that I do drift on my opinion on such things. And I think we all drift. But in a moment of self-reflection, I think that there needs to be a balance between understanding which battles can be won and how. And that's the great thing about Rogue. Rogue has a lot of that information. And on this show right now, Veles, you're just one of the resources for that. And we got the other guy, I don't, want to say his name, but, the guy V mentioned earlier, our legal friend over on Discord, has a plethora of information. And I would pay him for his time. I would offer to pay him for his time if I were to talk to him.
If one could get to Mars and find him, yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, to your point though about the legal versus the national, that's why CJ, our friend of Rogue, and former AWACS pilot, CJ has always said, work at the local level first, and take care of you, take care of your little pocket of the universe first before the bigger issues roll in and start impacting you. And I've always agreed with that.
Yeah, it's where you can have power. And even Ian Burlingame talked about that, I think, 2 shows ago with me and V. If you have a problem, that's pretty much where you're going to have the power to solve it. People like us who are just not giants on the playground. The Graham Hancock thing is about the last thing that we're out of time, but it's also the last thing I have. I think there was a discovery recently. I want to say it was like in a river in China, and they dug up some items that are suggesting that humans and civilization, not just like hominids, but civilization may have been around for as long as, I don't know, 100,000 years or some ridiculous number like that. And
it was about 200,000. And that's where you get into Mark Carlotto, where if Graham Hancock, if you're willing to give Graham Hancock a minute and take seriously what he's saying with a grain of salt in your own judgment, it's like then hang on when you start reading Mark Carlotto, because Carlotto is looking at like 580,000 years. There you go.
And that's definitely antediluvian, and that which means before the flood. And so I don't know if I told you this story, Veles, but not long ago, I was sitting with a couple of Orthodox priests. This was like Christmas, Orthodox Christmas. My cousin threw a party, and they're very involved at the Russian Orthodox Church here in town. My cousin's wife is Russian, and so on and so forth. And so they throw a lot of the major parties. Like if the bishops are going to be in our area, it's going to happen at my uncle's house, right?
Right.
So, the church first, and then so I'm sitting with them. And, priests are an interesting group of guys, whether they're Catholic or Orthodox. I've always gravitated to having conversations with them because they're very well read, and, you kind of have to be to make it that far in such religions. And the comment I made was that as time, and I know this is so trite, it's so like cliche to say, but in the conversation that led up to the following comment that I'm about to make, it made it not trite. Right. The longer I live the less I know. And everything we talked about really amounted to that. It's like, we really have no flipping idea what's going on. And a lot of the things we're given by the educational system, if they're not meant to confuse us or misdirect us, a lot of it's just plain wrong, even if they think it's true. So I'm always asking questions, and I don't disbelieve things. I don't believe them. I just kind of take information and be like, okay, there's some information. And I put it in a group. And then when more information lines up with that, my thesis gets stronger. So I don't know. I'm more comfortable not knowing, because I've learned that knowing is just an illusion. So that's my final thing to end with.
Final comment along those lines is I, again, also because of my know thyself, Kreos demos, and Temet Nosh, I have to be very forgiving with myself. Because admittedly, and any of you who've been listening to me for 5 years, this will not come as a shock in the slightest. I'm an incredibly driven person, and I am incredibly critical of myself. And it's everything I knew through my 30s and 40s. I'm like, okay, I got this down. I hit 50 and it's like, oh, shit. It's like, all right, Bob, take everything out of the warehouse. Anything that is not with this marking on it, just take it out. What do you want us to do with it?
Clear the whiteboard.
Throw it out. We're gonna reset the whole warehouse. Everything we thought we knew is crap. And then the last 5 years with you guys is the same thing. You told us 5 years ago we were fine. No, take it all out of the warehouse again. But we were certain. No. I double checked something Matthew Arrett said. It's totally legit.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to redo everything. And I've joked with V a couple times about, I'm glad I haven't written a book yet, because I would already be pulling an Eric Von Daniken going, just skip chapters 1 through 10. Just skip them. It's all wrong. I didn't know what the hell I was thinking.
I don't want to self-aggrandize. When I was working for Zurich, they would do these evaluations. It's always done in corporations. And the compliment that I got from management was that of the, employees, I was the one who was least resistant to change. So if there's like, okay, this is the way you've been doing it, and now you're going to do something different, like, okay, new files, learn this new system, new protocol, whatever. I was like, oh, okay. You gotta be ready to pivot and change. And, so what is it, V, in the finance world, the traders world? Is it strong opinions loosely held or loose opinions strongly held? I forget which one.
Strong opinions loosely held.
Loosely held, yeah.
So you guys got to be willing to.
That's how you make it. That's how you become great at what you do. You got to be willing to evolve, to move with the latest data. Otherwise, you're useless.
Yeah, I mean everything changes.
Yeah.
It's Patton's comment about fixed fortifications are a testament to mankind's inability to understand modern warfare, and especially now, folks, because I don't just say, "Oh, things are changing." No. We're being moved into a whole new model, and they're not going to tell us what that model is until we figure out what the model is. It's like, it's if Algo and V and I could share with you, which we can't, the conversations that have been going on behind the scenes amongst us and the other members of the Rogue community, because we've been on this never-ending text flurry outside of a whole bunch of insults towards one another because we're all friends. But my God, if you could just read the stuff we're saying to each other about, oh my God, did you see this thing out of Singapore? That's nothing. Did you see the news out of Hong Kong? It's just God almighty. And no, it's not just, well, those are the markets. Things change. No. Trust us. We would know if this is just normal chaos. This is chaos on a whole new level.
Gents, I got to call it here. V, can you get us out of here?
Yeah. With that being said, folks, we're over and out. Enjoy your weekends. We'll be back Monday. Keep it locked and loaded. RogueNews.com.